Hillary Clinton released a new ad against Bernie Sanders. Let's watch.
We've got to break up these huge financial institutions.
Break up the big banks.
Break them up, break them up, break them up.
About his plan to break up the big banks, Sanders is quoted as saying, "It's something I have not studied honestly the legal implications of."
That's so sad. In her mind, she thinks, got him! I got him! Except you just ran an ad in a Democratic primary that defends the big banks. You sure you think you got him? Now, obviously, she would counter and say, no, I'm pointing out that he doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. Except he doesn't know what he's talking about. If you actually read the New York Daily News interview, you'll find out very quickly that all these cackling hyena idiots who are like, he doesn't know what he's talking about, they're just wrong. So I'm going to read you the exact exchange that we're talking about here. The Daily News says, okay, well, let's assume that you're correct on that point. How do you go about doing it? Talking about breaking up the big banks. Sanders says, how you go about doing it is having legislation passed or giving authority to the Secretary of Treasury to determine under Dodd-Frank that these banks are a danger to the economy over the problem of too big to fail. Let's pause here. That answer is 100% correct. It's 100% correct. Either you pass new legislation that says, okay, we're going to break up the big banks. Let's do it. And by the way, Bernie Sanders has proposed that legislation recently. About a year ago, he proposed that legislation. So he knows exactly what he's talking about. He knows all the finer points and the nuance and the detail. Okay, so, and he also says, either you pass new legislation or under Dodd-Frank, if indeed we can prove that these banks are too big to fail and they're a danger to the economy, well, then we can break it up through the Secretary of Treasury. Crystal clear. So how does the Daily News respond? But do you think that the Fed now has that authority? Wait, he didn't say the Fed. He said the Secretary of the Treasury. You said the Fed. He didn't say the Fed. So Bernie responds, well, I don't know if the Fed has it, but I think the administration can have it. Okay, again, he's totally right. He's responding to what they said about the Fed. He's like, the Fed? Where the fuck did you get that from? I don't know if the Fed has it. Again, you brought it up. I didn't bring it up. You brought up the Fed. I brought up the Secretary of Treasury. But I think the administration can have it. So again, under Dodd-Frank, if you indeed prove that these are too big to fail, then you can actually do it under Dodd-Frank. Let's continue. Daily News says, how? How does the president turn to JP Morgan Chase or have the Treasury turn to any of those banks and say, now you must do X, Y, and Z? Bernie says, well, you do have authority under the Dodd-Frank legislation to do that, to make that determination. The Daily News then comes back again and says, you do? Just by Federal Reserve fiat? You do? Okay, so Ryan Grimm at Huffington Post, and thank you to everybody who tweeted that article to me so I could read it and indeed see the fact check right in front of my eyes. Ryan Grimm was like, everybody's saying Bernie, did something dumb and wrong and bad in this exchange. If anything, the Daily News was dumb and wrong and bad. Because Bernie brings up Dodd-Frank, he brings up perhaps new legislation, and he brings up the Treasury, and they interpret that as the Fed. So here's a good question for the Daily News. Do you not know the difference between the Treasury and the Fed? Apparently they don't. And you see, they're persistent on that point. Like, no, but the Fed. And Bernie's like, I didn't bring up the Fed. So Bernie is forced to say, because they bring up the Fed, I don't know if the Fed has it, meaning the authority to break up the banks. He says, I don't know. Now, why is he saying that? Because he never brought up the Fed. They brought up the Fed. They were wrong to bring up the Fed. They're confusing that or conflating that with the Treasury. So he's like, I don't know about the Fed. And now all the establishment shill idiots are like, he said he doesn't know. He said he doesn't know. He said he doesn't know. It's so obviously hacky and stupid. You're so obviously trying to play gotcha with him. And furthermore, that's actually true. I'm somebody who knows this policy inside and out. And I even said on the show yesterday, because they ask him, give me the specific statute you would use to go after Wall Street banks. He's like, the number? What do you mean, the statute? I can tell you, and he gives details about how Goldman Sachs, for example, committed fraud. He's right about that. But they're like, yeah, but what's the statute? He's like, no, of course I don't know the statute off the top of my head. I just know they committed fraud. Am I supposed to tell you it's statute, 17C, subsection L, line 13? Like, what are you saying? But they take that and they go, aha, he doesn't know. And now Hillary runs this ridiculous ad. We're going to break up the banks. Yeah? How? You don't know. Except he doesn't know. He said exactly how to do it. And because the Daily News doesn't know the difference between the Treasury and the Fed, they're like, aha, we got him. Everybody run articles saying he's stupid. Really? Your argument against Bernie fucking Sanders is going to be, he's a little light on the substance. Bernie Sanders, arguably the most substantive political campaign in American history. You're going to say, he's a little weak on the substance. Guys, this is a Republican 101 trick. It's what it is. We spoke about it with John Kerry. John Kerry, who was a war hero, you had the Bush administration turned that around and said, well, some people say he's a war hero. Other people say he's actually a war criminal and he's a little pussy. And so what happened? They ran with that narrative. They hammered away, and then eventually John Kerry lost because you turned his number one strength, that he's a war hero, into a negative. And meanwhile, George Bush, who was snorting cocaine and was nowhere to be found for the war, all of a sudden now he's the tough guy who's principled and who's there. This is such bullshit. It's unbelievable. This is the argument they're making now. And again, whether or not she realizes it, what you just did is you ran an ad defending the banks. You're like, oh yeah, breaking up the big banks. That's so stupid, pie in the sky. How are you even going to do it? Well, what, you think the American people look at these banks, they're like, yeah, defend them. Yeah, defend the size. They're bigger now than they were when we had the crash. And Hillary's running ads like, yeah, how are you going to break them up? What do you mean, how are you going to break them up? If you want to be a leader, if you want to actually protect the country from another downturn, you better fucking break them up. But she's like, haha, let's mock that. I'm going to defend the banks and say that this guy, who's known for policy substance, he doesn't know policy substance. It's embarrassing, it's pathetic, and it's hacky. And the main point is, guys, Hillary Clinton went from attacking Bernie Sanders early on in the race to, after my Arizona win, I'm just going to pivot to attacking Trump because primary schmimary locked up, bitch. Step aside. So she's running ads against Trump, giving stump speeches against Trump and the Republicans. And all of a sudden, Bernie Sanders wins 8 of the last 9 states by an average of like 17 quadrillion points. And all of a sudden, her campaign's like, ooh, did we say we were done with that guy? Break out the really harsh ads. But here's the problem. This is the same thing she did against Obama. When she started losing to Obama, they were like, okay, let's go nuclear here and go after him harder. And the problem with Hillary's harsh attacks is that they're not grounded in fact. So people look at them and they're like, oh, I don't like that. Ooh, I kind of don't like her for running that. And then they turn to the other person. That's what happened with Obama. That's what's going to happen here. Whereas Bernie has the advantage of when he runs really tough ads against Hillary Clinton or he says really tough things against her, they're true. They're accurate about how she sold out to the big banks and she voted for the Iraq war and she did all these terrible things. So people hear that and it rings true. They go, oh, that's right, because these are Democratic-based voters. Whereas her harsh attacks, she ends up defending the fucking banks who she's already rightly accused of being too in bed with. So by all means, Hillary, be my guest. Run those ads as much as you want. It's only going to hurt you in the long run because they're so immensely pathetic and misleading and wrong that even people who might be on the fence or might be leaning into your camp will go, something smells funky about that.